Hi there, how's it going, everyone? It's been a while since we did a podcast, actually, about a couple of months. But there is a really good reason as to why we're doing a podcast now as opposed to not doing it months prior, and that's because we had a bunch of shit get announced. But more specifically, today we're going to be talking about Dynasty Warriors 3 Remastered. And I'm joined here by my good friend Singh. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Uh, Still kind of a bit of a surprise, even though we've been warned in advance that this was going to be a thing. But definitely some welcome news for sure. I mean, definitely a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, well, you guys know me as BioDevil underscore Dom. And I like Musou games, so it's going to be a fun little podcast to do. I think I think the really exciting thing, and I don't know, maybe you feel the same way about this, is that well, it's finally a Dynasty Warriors game that's getting a remastered because we've had one Samurai Warriors game get a remastered, but it was Japanese exclusive, which was Samurai Warriors 2 HD. But now it seems like we're getting a worldwide release, which is pretty good. So I don't know. That's I feel like that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of uncharted territory here because that Samurai Warriors remaster was more of like a straight up, I guess, upscale, if you would want to call it that, was like some asset tweaks. This is more, well, like in this case with three, we're dealing with something a bit more extensive here, but I guess we'll get into that when we talk more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely a much different situation compared to that remastered because when they said they were gonna remaster this game, I guess we could just get it right into it. Actually, um, I mean, I was under the impression that it was just gonna be a straight HD port. I don't know about you, but like I thought they were just gonna do like, oh, this is a HD remaster of the old game. You can now play it in HD, maybe with some like online co-op, and it's potentially the complete edition with maybe a couple of minor tweaks here and there, right?
Yeah, and that was my first guess too, because that's generally been the approach with what they've done with some of the releases, even if it's not like even more HD than it already is. Like we've had like ports of more recent games being put on like different platforms. So it's like I could think the previous example I would think off the top of my head would have been Samurai Warriors 4 DX when it got a PC port like a while back, and that was more of a shadow drop than anything. So, but with this, it's definitely not what we were expecting in that regard. But going with like a completely different engine, and what it seems like they're going to do with this not just straightforward one to one. It To basically call it a remaster, even though they say it's a remaster, is a bit of an understatement here.
Yeah. Because well, and I'm glad you brought up like them doing like the other remasters because like they also did this with Ninja Gaiden, right? We had the Master Collection, for example, which was just a straight port from like the PlayStation 3 with some things from the PS Vita versions of 1 and 2 thrown into the mix, right? And like in this case, it's more of it's a Ninja Gaiden 2 Black situation where that game is just, even though they say it's like a quote unquote remaster, it's more of a remake because it's not even running on the same engine anymore. Ironically enough, I think that game was also running on Unreal 5.
Yes.
So it is the same situation. I'm a little disappointed that it's on Unreal 5. I feel like developers use Unreal 5 a little too much. I know we talk about this quite a bit actually outside of the podcast, but yeah, I was kind of hoping it would be the in-house engine they were using for Origins.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that, yeah, given that Origins would use the Cantata engine that they've been using for some of their other titles like Neo or Wolong, for example. The fact that they went with Unreal Engine was a bit of a surprise. I mean, not too much of a surprise considering, yeah, that's what Ninja Gaiden 2 Black did, but this was a different sub-developer within Koei Tecmo. So it kind of remains to be seen as to whether or not they'll have to encounter the technical pitfalls with some Unreal Engine 5 titles, and by some I mean majority of them. But it's really hard to tell if they can avoid it, like, but at least from my experience, at least playing it on PC with Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, it didn't seem to have a lot of those shortfalls, but again, we're dealing with a different dev team handling a different product. So, yeah, basically my only concern at the end of the day is just, will it actually run well? Will we deal with like the usual suspect issues with Unreal Engine 5 titles?
True. And it also goes without saying, your mileage may vary depending on the hardware that you're running if you're playing it on PC, because you could have different specs, and that may or may not be a factor in how well the game runs, which really should not be the case with most modern games, but unfortunately that engine is just a big old mess. Yeah, I mean, you could have it as bad as like Silent Hill 2 Remake, for example, where it has some pretty bad traversal stutter. Or you could have a more competent situation like Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, which for the most part, as far as I know, it runs pretty well. But if I'm not mistaken, it also has some issues with like shader.
I would say the biggest thing with that is it's definitely a heavy game. Like, there's a reason why when it comes to like the other platforms that game was released on, it was stuck on just PS5 and Xbox Series S. There was like no Switch version because it was a pretty heavy game. So even with something like, say, like if I tried running this on my old RTX 2070, I would basically have to be myself at 30 FPS, which, yeah, it's a big no-no with a action game like that. So, but
yeah, we're going to PS2 frame rates with that one. You're gonna try to recreate the OG experience, 360p, 30 FPS, maybe very like, what is it, low volumetric lighting, and also increase the fog to save performance. So.
Given how volumetrics work, yeah, that is probably going to have the opposite effect.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just,
and I've seen firsthand, because I messed with like the lighting settings on this game. If you like set it to like low, it straight up removes the lighting and it completely changes how the game looks in a not so great way.
So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this game runs. I'm sure we'll get more footage as the months come, because this game is coming out in March, actually, middle of March, which...
Yeah, so the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that, unlike with the Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, this game is not just limited to console-wise, just on Xbox and PlayStation. We have both a Switch 2 and a Switch 1 port listed, if the logos are any indication, so that's going to be interesting to see how Nintendo fans fare with the Switch 1 version.
Yeah, I would imagine that they would probably have that be the version that's like running at like 720p 30, maybe 900p at best. I don't know what is the max resolution for Switch games.
I think docked would be 1080p. It's been a while since I've looked this up, so anyone can pretty much roast me if I get this wrong. With docked, yeah, I believe it's 1080p. Undocked would be 720 max, I think. But even then, we've seen situations where a game can run at an even lower resolution. Like sometimes you may get titles running undocked at maybe like just I would say well above 480, but definitely not 720. And then you have situations like Ninja Gaiden 3 where yeah, uh, there's a reason why most people would be thankful the Switch 2 now exists, since that's no longer running out. What was it? Like it could get as low as like what was it, 300 or something?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's yeah, no bueno. Yeah, I think I think it's going to be interesting to see how this game runs across all the different platforms. Because originally this game was a PlayStation 2 game, and then if I recall correctly, Vanilla 3 had an Xbox port, but not Xtreme Legends. I think that was the case with a lot of the Dynasty Warriors and even Samurai Warriors games that were on the original Xbox. They didn't get those Xtreme Legends expansions, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I know for a fact that the Samurai Warriors one did not have Extreme Legends on Xbox. I'm actually just double checking real quick as to whether or not that was also the case with
yeah, which actually kind of makes me wonder why they didn't do like complete editions back in the day for like the Xbox, since that console could probably handle the larger disk space and stuff like that with all the
they generally ran off DVDs as the same as PS2. I don't think they did anything special with like storage on that front.
well, I mean, like, given the fact that the Xbox, at least, you know, the games looked better, I would just assume they would be able to fit all that content on there. But yeah, no, it's it is going to be interesting to see how these different consoles are going to run this game. And the other thing too is that this is also the complete edition, which means we get all of the Extreme Legends characters and content. Which means this is probably going to be like, I guess the best comparison would be like Dynasty Warriors 8 Extreme Legends Complete Edition, which is basically the base game plus Extreme Legends all in one package. You have all the features from Extreme Legends in there, all the extra content in there, and I'm assuming this is going to be like that, but it also is partially misleading because of the end of the trailer. Which I don't know if you saw the news regarding that teaser at the end of the trailer at all.
Yeah, it's a bit interesting how they're certainly teasing something new for sure. It's hard to tell what that is. Like, we know it
is definitely a new character, that's for sure. The thing that really throws me off, because and I guess everybody else also had the same thought too, right? Is that, oh, this must be Ziluan from Origins, the main protagonist from Origins, right? But I think it's the director or the producer, I'm not really sure. He was saying like, well, it could be him, or it also could be Yukimura Sanada from Samurai Warriors. So that just makes it more confusing, because it's like, on the one hand, right, like, I guess a Dynasty Warriors Origins crossover, that makes sense, because they just keep doing crossovers with that game, and I'm all for it. Like, I want more, because that game is pretty fun. So the more content, the better, right? But if it's a Samurai Warriors crossover, I think that would feel like we've gone full circle, because Samurai Warriors, right? It had Dynasty Warriors 3 Lu Bu as a special boss that you can encounter in the Abyss. So how cool would that be to have a Samurai Warriors character like Yukimura to show up as a just guest character to play as?
So the thing with like Samurai Warriors, my first guess would have been if it would have made a lot more sense if this was Dynasty Warriors 4, given the timing of when Samurai Warriors came out. So, because that one was closer to Samurai Warriors than 3 would have been. So, although it's like really interesting if they do end up going with Yukimura, if that's what the teaser implies, that they chose to do it in 3 and not 4. It wouldn't really matter either way at the end of the day. I just thought it would have made more sense, in my opinion, to do it if it was a 4 remaster.
I guess that would make sense. It is interesting though to speculate like who that character might be, because it could also just be a brand new character too, right? Or a character from a completely different franchise that they've also worked on.
It could also be a character from a later entry, just given a redesign that would make sense in the context of Dynasty Warriors 3.
I guess that's a fair point too. Well, we saw Red, right? So like it would probably have to be a character from Wu, right? Who do you think would be the character that would take up that role?
That would be tough, considering how there are a lot of characters in the later entries just from one faction alone, as opposed to like the whole cast.
True.
So narrowing down someone from Wu would be someone that would make sense with the context of the Wu cast that's already in that game. So it'd be a tricky point there. The other thing, going back to Zilwan, would be if it was the case that he was the character, how exactly would he be played out, considering how he doesn't really have a set weapon?
I think so. I think if it's Ziluan, it's going to be a thing of they're going to give him just the standard sword, because like pretty much in all the promotional artwork and all the like trailers and stuff, for the most part, like he was always having the sword, right? Because that's the weapon you start off with. So I think it's going to be just him using the reverse grip straight sword, and that's just going to be like his thing. If we're taking that in context to what that would be like in a mainline Dynasty Warriors game, right? Though to be fair, like most of the more recent mainline Dynasty Warriors games also let you use multiple weapons aside from what the characters are typically known for, so that doesn't really narrow it down, does it?
Yeah, the other thing that we'd have to keep in mind is that regardless of what they ultimately do with this character, it would be interesting to see how they would play, considering this would be going by like the old school move set that has changed over time, especially when you consider like the later games, like for example Dynasty Warriors 9 or even Origins, where it doesn't quite have the same strings or the same systems that the older games would have.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That we'll definitely talk about, because they did mention that certain aspects of Origins are gonna be in this new remastered for 3. That has me a little bit concerned, but we'll get to that when we get to that. I have one other theory that I want to kind of throw your direction, just to see what you think about it, right? What if it's just simply a costume, like a brand new costume, just based off of Dynasty Warriors Origins for one of the characters to use instead of a brand new character that they're teasing? Because that could also be the case too, since in Origins you get the Dynasty Warriors 3 Zhao Yun costume for Zilu 1, and that's the only costume outside of some of the pre-order DLC that they had, which was like some EX variations of his default, and also the Wolong skin that they added in as well.
It's definitely something to think about for sure. That would be a costume. They could certainly get away with a lot more, since it's not limited by engines in this case, so they could pretty much do whatever they want in terms of costumes. Like, it wouldn't just be limited to one character when you think about it. This is the kind of game where you could have like multiple costumes, so whether it be through DLC or just straight up including it. I don't know. Well, you can easily answer this since you've actually played the game, but I wouldn't know if they handled alternate costumes or it was it just EX colors in
In
the original.
in the original, no, actually, I don't remember. I don't remember if they had like straight up alternate costumes or EX colors. It's been quite some time, and I don't have a current save file of the game that has an alternate costume for me to use. Um, if I had to take a guess, though, given just how they've changed the games quite a bit over the years, and this is especially true with like Samurai Warriors, where we did have a lot of alternate costumes beforehand, and then they just kind of shifted from that to just EX colors in a lot of cases, with certain games being exceptions, of course. I would assume that it's probably just straight up alternate costumes, but like I said, I don't have a current save file to tell you outright because it's been quite a while since I've actually like gotten everything done and gone through the process of like leveling up all the characters. Because as much as I like Musou games and I do like Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors is more of my like forte, and also Warriors Orochi. So Dynasty Warriors I play a little more casually, but I do like Dynasty Warriors all the same. So it is something that I'm gonna have to figure out later on. But you do bring up a good point too. You know, they might add in costumes for other characters. Some of that stuff might be new, and some of that stuff might be DLC as well. I don't think them calling the game the quote-unquote Complete Edition will stop them from releasing DLC, considering that this is Koei Tecmo, and they absolutely love doing DLC to the detriment of all of our wallets. So the DOA team says hi. So, so you know, it's I do think that we could possibly see some DLC stuff, probably stuff that's in reference to some of the other Dynasty Warriors games as well. Maybe not necessarily the ones that are directly after 3, but definitely like some of the more recent ones. I could see that being a case, because like I know like the costume for Zhao Yun from Dynasty Warriors 6, that tends to be DLC, or even the Strike Force variation of it tends to be DLC as well. So, at least in Warriors Orochi that's the case, but I'm not so sure about
Speaking
Dynasty
of
Warriors.
Zhao Yun, speaking of Zhao Yun, so I was actually doubling back at my research here. So Xtreme Legends did introduce EX colors, and I could see Zhao Yun's basically had his usual outfit but in red. So yeah, they are a thing. So we can tell that at least they have EX colors. No alternate costumes outright to work with, but EX colors for sure. And I did double back on ports release. So yeah, there was an Xbox version of 3, but not for Extreme Legends. So same dealio there.
Okay, yeah. So this would be the first time that Xbox players would get a complete edition of the game, which is pretty cool. I'm gonna be interested to see what they do though with that, because they could easily just say, hey, we're not gonna do EX colors this time. We'll just drop all those in favor of like alternate costumes. But they might keep that stuff in favor of just doing DLC, which I think is a little more likely. So we'll see how that.
Yeah, based on what they've advertised, it doesn't seem like they're cutting anything. At least it's that strongly implied. That could change, but at the very least, essential stuff like characters and scenarios are guaranteed to be in. So it'd be interesting to see if we like see any cut corners on that regard.
With that in mind, they did say that they were going to make a couple of adjustments that were sort of based off of Dynasty Warriors Origins. And I said earlier that I am a little bit concerned about that, and to kind of elaborate on what I mean, I'm a little concerned that they might take some of the combo strings from that game because that game kind of removed some of the launchers and made them special moves, which required a whole nother gauge to work with on top of item. At least droppable item that you can just get from like generic soldiers and stuff. So I'm concerned that like things like launchers and certain combo strings are not going to work the way that I remember them. I hope that's not the case though. I hope that if anything, if there is something that they do take from Origin specifically, they could take the like evasion and parry mechanics. I think that would be totally fine if they implement that into 3. And also, I'm not opposed to them implementing the bodyguard system that is in Origins, because I think it is genuinely better than what we had in every game, every Musou game that featured bodyguards of some kind. Because usually the bodyguards, they're just kind of there, and yeah, they sometimes do work, but they were usually just like I think it was like 4 to 8 maximum bodyguards that you would have, and they would have specific roles, and they would just act like all the other generic not officers, but like soldiers, but they would sometimes attack a little more, be a little bit more defensive, but it didn't really have a major impact on the gameplay.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing with that. When you start dealing with like gameplay changes like that, you really start to question if you should be calling it a remaster at that point, because you're doing a lot more than just simply updating the graphics on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also is going to be interesting too, though, because at the same time it might not be any of the things that we're thinking of. It could just be like other things too, like the skill tree and system from Dynasty Warriors Origins, or it could just be the way that the mounts work. Could be a bunch of different things, right? They didn't really go into detail as to what aspects of Origins are that they're like gonna bring over and just try to like, I guess, recreate or reuse to some extent or variation of, I guess. I don't know how to put that, but it's like that's kind of the situation that we're in. That there's some little bits of Origins that are going to be in Dynasty Warriors 3 Complete Edition, for better or for worse.
I think one thing we can tell from at least some of the footage and screenshots is that when it comes to enemy mobs, they're definitely taking a different approach with how that's going to be, well, not just rendered, but how they're handled. So, yeah, like a big thing with the older games is that you couldn't really render a lot of like peons on screen. Like you would have to just have them pop in as you move. But with this quote-unquote remastered here, we're seeing like, I wouldn't go as far as to say they're like Origins level of density, but there's definitely a lot more compared to the original. And it'd be interesting to see how that plays out if it comes to like any AI adjustments with that.
Yeah, well, we might have the same density, enemy density, which I'm all for. Like, if there's anything that we can say about like the old like PlayStation 2 Dynasty Warriors games, like absolutely they could benefit from more enemies on screen, because that was just something that it was just a hardware limitation of the time, where like they would implement like heavy fog so they could even fit the amount of enemies that they would put on screen, right? And as the games got onto better hardware, that started to change, and they started to increase the amount of enemies and stuff, which is why I think it became also easier to get like over 1,000 kills on any particular stage, right? Like, because in the old games that took work, right? That took a lot of time and work. But in the newer games, it's like easy because of how many enemies we have to deal with now, right? I guess another thing that they could take too, since we're on the subject, the lock-on, because I think that's been a thing since 8, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't recall 8 having a lock-on, at least when I played it. It's been a very long time.
It might have been
Yeah.
9. I don't remember. One of the more recent Dynasty Warriors implemented lock-on, so it's definitely a new feature or newer feature, and that's something that I think that could easily be applied to a to this Dynasty Warriors remake or remastered.
Yeah, and sometimes you also deal with like more subtle aspects. Like I think you may have seen this in the trailer. Like when you're seeing like the dialogue happen, it seems like they're actually redone the lip sync, or I don't know if it's just in context of like new dialogue or redone dialogue. It's really hard to tell, but it definitely seems like they're making use of what they could do with just any new engine really when it comes to like lip sync. So I don't know if it's all automated or if they just simply managed to like import the old data and it somehow just translate well into a new like, graphical engine. It could just be other things too.
That's a good thing you brought up too, because Dynasty Warriors voice acting. Yeah. How do you feel about the old voice acting?
I'll just sum it up in one word: iconic. Although not for the reasons most people unaware of this entry would be thinking of.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, nothing beats having just a random guy going like telling you, "Oh, my king, go escape," and then just going like, "Yeah," like out in the background, or the one that I always quote because it's the most iconic Dynasty Warriors line. It's Lu Bu. Like or from the same stage, do not pursue Lu Bu. like I look, I love the cheesy ass dialogue, the voice acting, and even Origins. Origins is so self-aware that they like made sure like, hey, let's keep some of that cheesiness and campiness, which is why I would have played that game in the Mandarin dub that they have, but like, no, I'm sorry, it's just the English voice acting, the fact that they put in the like effort to try to make it cheesy like classic Dynasty Warriors, like, yeah, they have to keep it the same. Like, and I've seen a lot of people say like, please don't change the dialogue, please don't change the dub. It's perfect as is.
Yeah, my hope is if they can't use the old dialogue, whether it be through technical or logistical reasons like licensing, for example, because I wouldn't know if this was dubbed in the US or if they just simply had English speakers in Japan doing it at the time.
Or Canadian.
I would at least hope they try to match like the original's energy.
Yeah.
If they had to redo it.
Yeah. That would be the hope. I think they can do it considering Origins. Origins is, like I said, I think it did a pretty good job with matching that sort of vibe with the dialogue and the dub for that game. So I think they could do it. Although nothing is going to beat them like mispronouncing the names too, like calling Cao Cao Cao.
Yeah, that would be a total loss if they don't somehow manage to keep that if they had to redo the dub.
Yeah.
It actually just reminded me, so I was reading through the website just to see like some of the technical aspects, and apparently like outside of English and Japanese, I don't know if they're redoing the Japanese dialogue. Even though the trailer did have Japanese dialogue, I don't know if it's the exact same. So I'm sure someone with a keen eye or ear would know about that. But they also listed a Chinese dub, which they have not done until like what was it, 9, I believe. So to do it in a game that, like in a remake of a game that happened a long time ago, it'd be really interesting to see how that plays out.
So maybe that one would be, hey, like this is the new dub. They redid everything, right? They tried to do it more seriously, right? So it's probably gonna sound and hit differently, right, than the if they keep the other stuff, right? If anybody watching in China, if they happen to manage to watch this illegally in China. Like, you have to understand that English dub, like, it is bad, but we love it because it's so bad. It's so bad, it's good. So, yeah, it's, you know, it's very reminiscent of like those old like kung fu movies that were dubbed in English, very much in that sort of vein. So it's, which I mean, I guess is very fitting because Dynasty Warriors, it's set in China, right? So
It makes you question if that was the point of direction they went with when they originally did that dub.
you strike a very good point. Yeah, so like I think that's going to be interesting to see. The other thing too, because we were talking about the potential new character, assuming it is a brand new character that's getting put into the game, are they going to record new lines of dialogue, or dare I say, would they use AI voices, right, to kind of fill in the gaps for the fact that they have to write a whole new scenario with characters involving this specific character, right?
I think that would ultimately depend on how like this new character would be integrated into the game. It could just be a straight up bonus thing where they don't actually interact with the cast. They would just simply have lines responding to various actions they do in game. Like you're obviously gonna have like something when you do, like when you get the 1,000 KO mark, that'd be a given.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't need to re-record new dialogue using like previous voices for that, because again, it would just be something to do. It'd be the equivalent of just how characters are normally handled in free mode. Sometimes they just wouldn't have like specific dialogue for a stage they weren't normally involved in, outside of maybe the odd exception here and there.
Yeah. I mean, I could see that too. Because we don't know how far they're going to take it, right? Because it could just be, hey, here's a new playable character. You could just play them in free mode. If you're playing in co-op, right? Anybody could just pick that character and play them in co-op mode, right? And just go from there, right? And that's another thing too, actually. Since I brought it up, co-op. That's going to be really interesting how they handle that, because this is going to be the first time probably that we'll be able to play online co-op with Dynasty Warriors 3.
Yeah, I'd have to take another check at the site, but from what it seemed like, they didn't specify if it was local or online. It seemed like it would be local at the minimum, which would make sense depending on how they're developing this. All the code would still be in there. But for online, yeah, that would definitely be interesting to see if they can pull it off. Because the thing with online in some Warriors games is it's a bit hit or miss if it actually works.
True. Yeah, I recall Warriors Orochi 3 was like very weird, and it was also very dead when it came to co-op, which is kind of unfortunate. So, but yeah, no, it's it's gonna be interesting if that's gonna appear in this game. I'm also curious about the soundtrack, because I'm assuming they're just gonna reuse the same soundtrack. They're not gonna change anything, but they could also just introduce like, hey, here's all those same tracks, but you also get remix editions, or you're only getting remix editions, or certain stages might get remixes, right? Depending on how that goes. So that'll be kind of interesting to see as well.
Having played some later entries like 8, for example, they outright reuse older tracks in like some scenarios they introduced later down the line, and they've had no issues like releasing the soundtracks in some form, whether it be in-game or like just as like downloads through like streaming services. So I would not be surprised if they kept the old soundtrack for sure. Would they include new remixes? They've definitely done that a bit with Origins, specifically with some tracks from 4. So they could easily do the same here if they choose to. But I would say the old soundtrack has aged like fine wine. pretty much any of their old tracks from that day would still hold up. So if they just keep the old soundtrack as is, I wouldn't have any complaints.
You know what they could also do? They could pull a page from Warriors Orochi 3, have DLC tracks or just unlockable tracks, right? Yeah, let's just say unlockable tracks just for the sake of consistency here, right? We'll forget about DLC for just a moment, but like just unlockable tracks that you get just from playing the game, beating various stages, right? And you know hear all these different tracks, and just giving you the option after you've completed a stage, if you want to replay that stage, you can go into the like the music option and just change it from there. I think Samurai Warriors 4 also did that as well, where
It definitely did.
Where you could just pick tracks if you've already played that stage and just use whatever tracks you wanted to use, and then that's the track that you hear for the entirety of the stage instead of the dynamic soundtrack where they start changing tracks depending on the scenario and situation within the battle, right?
You actually kind of gave me an interesting idea here. So what's to stop them from including additional modes outright? Like,
Okay.
yeah, so like we've had modes, I always forget the names off the top of my head, but I know for a fact that 7 and 8 had additional modes, well, where like you could kind of just jump in at any time to like do like small like skirmishes with different objectives. For context, like something like say Samurai Warriors 4 Chronicles mode, where like it's kind of like that context, it's just how they do it is a bit different.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder if they can include something like that for Dynasty Warriors 3. Or they could do something completely out there like, what was it, Sugoroku mode from Samurai Warriors 2. Like it's just a full-on minigame.
Yeah, the little dice mini game, and you go on a board and there's like 4 players or whatever. You know, and that would be kind of interesting too if they introduced a game like that again, with like online. Like, because that was a game mode that was meant to be played with co-op partners, and you could play it with up to 4 people.
But the information lists only like 1 to 2, so I don't think they would expand online capabilities to that extent if they went that route. But it definitely would be interesting if that would be actually something to think about. Like, given that this is like a heavier title now, I wonder if it would be possible to just expand that to 4 players if you think about it. They're probably not going to do it with this game, but if they ever did like another remaster down the line, I wonder if it'd be technically possible to do that. Like just to have like a 4-player simultaneous co-op in a Musou game.
So this is something that I was talking with you about when they first announced that. Well, actually, even before they announced this too, was I was a little concerned about if they would do the Xtreme Legends content, which now we know that they are, because we weren't sure if it was going to be exactly Dynasty Warriors 3 because they kind of left it up in the air, and then they kind of more or less gave it away by saying like, oh yeah, like Dynasty Warrior, well, it's Shinsan Goku Musou 2, right? That was like the game that I worked on, and like it's like okay, thanks, buddy. You basically gave it away, right? That Dynasty Warriors 3 was going to get remastered. But Xtreme Legends had the remix feature. That was like something that Xtreme Legends was really known for those expansions. Like anytime you got those games, at least back on the PS2, you would take your vanilla game. You could play the Xtreme Legends expansion as if it were its own game, like as a standalone release. But if you took the base game, hit the remix feature in the Xtreme Legends game while it's booted, then pull out the disc of Xtreme Legends, put in the base game, and then let the system read the base game data and swap the discs back, right? Then you had all the content from vanilla to work with the added benefit of now the scenarios are updated to include those new characters that were specific to Xtreme Legends, plus the new items and the new weapons for all of the characters to use, right? How do you think they will handle that, not just from a content standpoint, but also just from a standpoint of like completionist and like trophy wise? Because like they might force you to play the game as like, oh, play it vanilla first before you even use any of the Extreme Legend content, right?
I think going by patterns of previous instances when they've done complete editions or definitive editions of later Dynasty Warrior entries, like I'll cite 7 and 8 as an example. When those came out as like a complete package, they had everything out there as once, with any changes based off of what was done in Extreme Legends. So I would not be surprised if they went with the exact same approach here. Like the fact that the trailer showed you playing as Lubu, since he wasn't playable in the base game. You had to have Extreme Legends to play as Lubu in that game. It tells me that they're likely going to go that same route. I don't think there's been demand to have a way to play like the vanilla game just with like that edition's content and balancing. I've never really seen cases where like people would just prefer that, but it would be interesting to see if they gave that as an option, just for like, it'd be hard to say preservation's sake considering all the changes they're doing with the game in general, but
I would say for comparison's sake maybe, or just for interest's sake, because like some people might have only played the vanilla game and maybe they just want to play it that way, and just, you know, the Extreme Legends stuff is just like a bonus for them, right? Obviously they would be in the niche, but like, you know, I think it would.
You actually just gave me an idea that could work out if, and it didn't seem like they were advertising this, but I would not be surprised if they did this as well. They go the exact same route they did with the, I believe it was a remake for Atelier Marie, which was like the first in that franchise, where the deluxe edition, I believe, included or a port of the original version of that game as is. So if they go that route, I could definitely see them having like edition select for that, just to see how it would play out just as vanilla and Extreme Legends. But
but then the question becomes, how do they implement the remix feature on just a straight port that's included in that game? Does it like just know to do that then, or like, you know, because before, like, you had to it was a physical process, right? And obviously with the more, like, I know this in the case of, like, Dynasty Warriors 8, right? When you just hit remix and it just works, right? And that's all you have to do. Just right from the gate. And you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to pull out the disc. You don't have to do any disc swapping, right? Doesn't have to read any data. It just does it. So
I would imagine if you were to select it as Extreme Legends, you would still have the remix option just to pull the data, quote unquote, pull the data, or in this case, it would just simply switch it over to like the whole complete package, just in that context. It's definitely an interesting thing to think about, because I know there's some like re-releases of old games where they try to like mimic how stuff like that would work. Like, for example, like Metal Gear Solid and the Master Collection. It was more of an emulation of Metal Gear Solid 1, but whenever you'd have to trigger a disc change, whether it be through like going back between like different points of the campaign, like you, aside from the usual disc change point, it would actually show the discs being swapped out in a little cutscene they did. So it'd be neat if they actually showed that, if they did a remix feature for like Extreme Legends, if they went that route, like, just for like visual sake. It'd be a neat thing, but I think at this point we're really starting to get ahead of ourselves of what they could do.
Yeah. So last thing that I want to talk about, because I think there's really not much else we can say until there's like more information that comes out. This is the first like game in a really long time that they've done a like quote unquote remaster for. Like I said, the last being Samurai Warriors 2 HD. And I was kind of having this conversation with James earlier about, I would really like it if they did a Samurai Warriors in the same vein, or even a Warriors Orochi game, right? But more so Samurai Warriors, just because that was like my favorite franchise as far as or sub-series of Musou games. And I want to know, like in your opinion, which game do you think they should do next in the future if they do decide to do more? And it doesn't necessarily have to be Dynasty Warriors, it could be any Musou game.
It'd be a fair question because there are a lot of ways they could go about this. I would think the logical step would be to pull an entry from Samurai Warriors, just because that hasn't had a new entry since 5. I don't know, I would debate on calling that one 5 just because we'd be getting way off topic at that point. But from that franchise, I would think it would make sense to do 1, just because we've already had 2, although I would love 1 for 2 as well, just because that was the first one I played from that franchise.
So I think, like I said, I had this conversation with James earlier, so I would love Samurai Warriors 1, like a complete edition of Samurai Warriors 1, exactly how they're doing with Dynasty Warriors 3. And, maybe they could also give us the added benefit of like making characters like Nagamasa and Ieyasu finally playable in Samurai Warriors 1, because they were just unique officers, but they only had spears that they could use, like generic spears. And you could easily change that in a remaster where you give them the weapons that they would typically use in most of the Samurai Warriors franchise, right? The thing is, though, is that going off of the statement that they made about why they chose Dynasty Warriors 3, because I'm sure that there are people that are wondering, well, why not Dynasty Warriors 1 or Dynasty Warriors 2, right? They decided to remaster Dynasty Warriors 3 because it was the fan favorite Dynasty Warriors game, also cited as being, to a lot of fans by the developers, as the best Dynasty Warriors game to release, like, ever, right? And if we're just going off of that logic, right, they might choose to do Samurai Warriors 2 instead, make that the complete edition plus Empires, instead of doing Samurai Warriors 1, which in my opinion needs it a little more. I'm not opposed to Samurai Warriors 2, it just, Samurai Warriors 1 I think needs it way more, for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah, I think the only question mark with 1 is a rather... Oh, I don't know how Koei Tecmo would feel about this nowadays, but there is a bit of an elephant in the room with that game.
With Honganji, or whatever his name is?
Yes. Yeah, Kenya Honganji, I believe was his full name.
I think they would do it. I think they would do it still. Just for preservation's sake of that game, I think they would do it. That's a character that could also make playable too, because he was another character that had a unique character model but was never playable. So it's look, if they have what's his face, Zheng Zhao or whatever his name is, the yellow turban guy.
Yeah.
That guy's a weird hippie that tries to get people to join his cult in most of the games, right? With the exception of Origins, where I haven't played some of the more recent ones completely, so I don't know how they handle his story a lot. But in Origins, they just make him a guy who just wanted to bring peace and give people food. And he kind of
I can say with absolute certainty that Zhang Jiao is not that much different in the later games of when it comes to like his classic appearance. It's basically only Origins where they went with this new direction with him.
Oh, okay. So I kind of I feel like if you can do the weird occult hippie guy from feudal China, right? You could totally do that with the controversial Japanese figure as well, you know. And let me remind you too that technically hasn't stopped them with games like Rise of the Ronin, where there were certain historical figures that people were complaining about being in that game, even though it was technically historically accurate for that character to be there, right? So I think they could do it, but yeah, I would like Samurai Warriors 1, because it's a game that I have a lot of nostalgia for one. It is the game that kind of introduced me to Samurai Warriors, but it's not the first one that I played technically. I started with 2 Empires and then went back, but I remember watching my brother's dad playing Samurai Warriors 1 a lot, so that's how I remember that game. Yeah, so it's one I have a lot of nostalgia for, and I think it would be just really cool if they could remaster it, update it, address some things that could use some quality of life, of course, right? But I think Samurai Warriors 2 would be the obvious one because of popularity's sake, because 2 is considered to be the best one in the franchise. Which is another thing too, by the way, because I was also bringing this up. Samurai Warriors 2, right, specifically Empires, it came out before Xtreme Legends. And 4 of the characters from Xtreme Legends don't have those unique character models, but 2 of them do, of the 6 like exclusive characters from that expansion, right? And the 2 that are in Empires.
Well, I mean, in that case, it made sense because they were also in the base game. They just weren't playable at the time.
True. Which specifically for Empires, right? Like if they were to remaster 2 as a whole, I feel like this is the time where they could, as a quote-unquote remaster or remake, they could address Empires by saying, hey, those characters and all the weapons that they had, they're now playable in this new remastered version of 2. And because, you know, the base game in Xtreme Legends would already be a complete edition, right? Now we don't have to worry about that for the quote-unquote base game, right? So at least thinking about that for what that would mean for Samurai Warriors 2, I think that's still pretty cool, just to think about that alone.
It would definitely be a neat touch for sure. Like, even if they couldn't do like new dialogue to make them playable, at the very least, I would think it would make sense for them to at least be able to use the weapons when you have to fight them, not be like generic katanas. Instead, they would have their unique styles.
Yeah, because I think, I think for Empires, you could, hypothetically speaking, if we're talking about a complete edition of 2, they could address that by saying like all the exclusive content that was in like the new stages, the new weapons, and the new characters, that all can be applied to Empires because now it's a complete edition, right? So it technically shouldn't be an issue then at that point. You just wouldn't create any specific scenarios because you would have to just run off of the scenarios from the base game because of how that game was released, right? Because then you would have to like create a whole new. I think you would have to do a whole lot of work just to implement all the scenarios that were specific to Xtreme Legends into Empires, like reverse engineer it, which I don't think they would do.
I think it would really depend on how you like code it. Like, there's been cases where you have like some source ports of other games where like they just straight up have like the old data from one like version on there, and they would just pull in data from other versions like just dynamically through whatever they're using to like port it over. It can really depend on how it's developed in the back end. It's possible, but whether they put in the work to do that is like another story.
Samurai Warriors aside, right? If I guess very final question for real, right? Um, if there was a Dynasty Warriors game and a Warriors Orochi game, let's say, that you would want to see get also this treatment, um, which would they be and why?
Okay, so for Warriors Orochi, the easiest answer would be Z.
I knew you were gonna
Just
say
because,
that.
yeah, it's the logical answer. Just because aside from it being the oldest, you're technically covering two games with that one.
That is a fair point, because it is 1 and 2 put together, right? So it has all the content for both.
Yeah. Plus, it's the only version that is not available on modern platforms. Because we can easily, we can easily play 3 Ultimate and 4 on like most platforms. Well, more so with 4, but you kind of get the idea. With 1 and 2, well, essentially through Z, it's still locked behind at most or at furthest the PlayStation 3.
Yeah, because I was gonna say too, like by technicality, if we don't include Z, right? If we just talk about 1 and 2, furthest would be the PSP then, because they had PSP ports. You can play 1 digitally on PS3, because the PS2 port of that game was available that way. But Warriors Orochi 2, for some reason, they never released it that way. It was really fucking weird. So yeah, I think Z would be the right answer. But what about Dynasty Warriors? Which one would you want to see get remastered in a similar fashion?
I'd have to think about this carefully when you consider context. It wouldn't be a mainline entry, but my personal pick would be Strike Force, specifically based off the console version of that. Just because, yeah, aside from all the crazy stuff you can do in that game, it's an easy hit for multiplayer online because it's 4-player co-op. It was practically built off that in the backbone, so it would make the most sense to go with that, in my opinion, whether or not they'd actually work with the online. Since you could technically play with AI characters in that, you couldn't do it in the PSP version, but with the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions, you could, instead of getting like anyone online, you could set up to like 3 AI helpers. Although this would affect the balancing of missions, so like enemies would have more health and whatnot. But for me, it would be an interesting choice because it would be different in that respect as well, considering like it doesn't play like a traditional Dynasty Warriors game for obvious reasons. Like you would have some strings, but the movement in that game is just a completely different beast, to put it lightly.
Yeah, that game, I don't know much about that game. I just know that the characters have like weird looks because they have like elements associated to them. They kind of almost have like a Saint Seiya vibe going with like all their armor being all spiky and shit. Like Zhao Yun looks really cool. You can actually get that costume in Warriors Orochi 3 Ultimate, I think. I think that one specifically was DLC. And so it was, it's I think that would be a cool thing to see. I'm kind of mixed between Dynasty Warriors 4 and Dynasty Warriors 5. One of the two, because 3, 4, and 5 were like the peak of the franchise, so I think either one of those two would be fine. I have a little more fond memories of 4 because I did play 4 Empires, and I did like that game, but I never really got into the main version of Dynasty Warriors 4. But I do have it now, so I'm gonna have to like eventually get into that game and play that again.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting choice because I know one thing people are mixed about with that one, because that was the first time they walked back on this with 5 and 6 at the time, but this with 4, like the stories were not handled by character, they were handled more by faction.
Yeah, Yeah, that was the case too. But they do that now more so than they did before.
It's just because of yeah, it was yeah, it made sense with like later titles because there's just so many characters to deal with that it would be impossible just to give everybody a unique story. Instead, you would just simply give you the choice between different characters at different points in one story. So at least then, at least at that point, it would make sense. With 4, it was an experiment that hard to say if it worked well because again, I never played much of 4. Like I've only played it briefly, so I can't really comment on my own experience with that. But I know at the time when that came out, I think people were kind of mixed on there. But again, you'd have to speak with someone who's played that one extensively.
Yeah, I think I think with the scenarios like that, at least for the modern Dynasty Warriors, right? Like, I think that makes more sense to do that with Dynasty Warriors because, as you mentioned, because of how many characters Dynasty Warriors has. Like, that's even the case with, like, Warriors Orochi, right? Like, there's so many characters that you end up probably just picking your favorite ones and sticking with those for the entirety of the game, right? So, like, Dynasty Warriors is kind of maybe a similar situation where you just play the scenarios, play the characters you want to play, and just do that instead of going by individual character. I do prefer the, which I know is kind of a little weird when I say that because I just said I would want to see a remaster of 4, right? I do prefer when Musou games do individual character stories, mostly because of the fact that I think it's better when they give us those like what if scenarios and like alternate history like battles and stuff like that, because that's way more fun to go through, like especially like in, you know, say like the Samurai Warriors series. Like the first game was really good about that because like you would have like the branching paths and scenarios, which is also like the only Musou game as far as I know that's really done that, where you can do something different in the battle and that dictates how the story goes, right? Something you don't really do in most Musou games. So I think it's just cool when you get to like play a character that would normally die like pretty early on in the game, but this time you play an alternate scenario where they live, and then you get to experience all these different battles and like story that just otherwise does not happen in the canonical story, right?
Yeah, I think the only example I played within like the Dynasty Warriors series that actually did that, well, obviously aside from Origins, but I haven't gotten to that point yet, it would be 8, where like literally they did exactly as you described. You could have certain objectives that you normally wouldn't be able to do unless if you did an objective in a prior mission, and that would eventually open up to an alternate, I guess you could call it a sequence of events with a different ending to that campaign entirely.
Yeah, I like that stuff. Like, I've seen in the community, at least from like the fan base, that people do prefer like the more historically accurate stuff, and I'm like, you know, this is a Musou game. The last thing I'm playing for is historical accuracy. I mean, I appreciate it when they have it. Don't get me wrong. Like, part of the reason why I'm like so into like Japanese history, and I know a little bit about like Chinese history, is because they have like some of those scenarios be historically accurate. But I like the more fun like what if scenarios too. Like Koei Tecmo was like really awesome with that when they did that back in the day. So I like that too. So anyway, I don't want to diverge too far and get into all that. So with that all said, Dynasty Warriors 3 Complete Edition coming out on March 19th. I'm super excited. I know you're super excited. But with that all said, where can we find you, good sir?
You can find me on Twitter at sing_long. I think I still have the underscore. I always forget, but not hard to find since I don't really do much there anyways. You could also find me on YouTube with the same handle. Again, can't remember if I have an underscore space or nothing in between. But again, not hard to find.
Yep, and you all can find me as biodevil_dom on pretty much everything that I'm on. I don't know when this is going to be up, but depending on when it is up, I should have an Onimusha video up that you can check out, and I don't know what our next podcast is going to be, but I think we might end up doing Neo 3, talking about just how we thought of the alpha and some of the new information regarding that game. I might wait until a beta comes out, though. I'm not really sure at this point because I've been really pushing back that Neo 3 alpha impressions video, and I wanted to do that, but I just got caught up in a lot of other things like real life stuff, so we'll see. But hopefully there should be a podcast soon after this one. So until then, it's been fun, and we'll see you all in the next one. So bye.